My name is Richard Anderson, and I'm 76 years old, sitting here alone in my Nashville home that used to be filled with the laughter of children and grandchildren, but now feels like a tomb of silence because my own grandson destroyed my family with a single word: racist. 6 months ago, during what should have been a joyful Thanksgiving dinner, my 22-year-old grandson Tyler took an innocent comment I made about neighborhood changes and twisted it into evidence that I was a hateful bigot who needed to be canceled and cut out of the family forever. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please share your location in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, I hope you'll consider subscribing, because what happened to me reveals how quickly families can be torn apart by misunderstandings and how dangerous it can be to speak freely in today's world. Let me start by telling you who I really am, not the monster my grandson painted me as on social media and in family arguments. I'm a retired postal worker who spent 38 years delivering mail through every neighborhood in Nashville, rain or shine, building relationships with people of every background imaginable. I served in Vietnam when I was 19 years old, fighting alongside black soldiers, Hispanic soldiers, soldiers from every corner of America, and I learned that courage and character have nothing to do with the color of a person's skin. When I came home from the war in 1969, I married my high school sweetheart Dorothy, and we built a life together in the same house where I'm sitting now. We raised 2 children, Michael and Patricia, in this 3-bedroom ranch home in a neighborhood that was predominantly white when we moved in, but gradually became more diverse over the decades. I watched that change happen, and I welcomed it because good neighbors are good neighbors, regardless of their race or background. Dorothy and I were together for 49 years, until cancer took her from me 3 years ago. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever experienced, harder even than the fear and violence I witnessed in Vietnam. She was my best friend, my moral compass, and the love of my life. After her funeral, I struggled with depression and loneliness that seemed to swallow me whole some days. Our son Michael is 47 years old and works as an accountant here in Nashville. He's married to Jennifer, a school principal, and they have 2 children, Tyler, who just turned 22 and is finishing his senior year at Vanderbilt University, and Emma, who's 19 and attending community college. Our daughter Patricia is 44, works as a nurse practitioner, and lives in Memphis with her husband and teenage daughter. For most of Tyler's life, we had a wonderful relationship. I was the grandfather who taught him to throw a baseball, took him fishing at Old Hickory Lake, helped with his math homework, and shared stories about his grandmother and our family history. Tyler was a bright, curious kid who seemed to enjoy spending time with me and learning about the world from someone who had lived through so many changes in American society. When Tyler started high school, I began to notice changes in his personality and interests. He became more serious, more focused on social issues, and increasingly critical of what he saw as problems in American society. At first, I was proud of his developing social consciousness and his desire to make the world a better place. These seemed like admirable qualities in a young person. During his high school years, Tyler and I would have long conversations about history, politics, and social change. I shared stories from my time in Vietnam, talk about the civil rights movement that I witnessed as a young man, and describe how Nashville had evolved during my lifetime. Tyler seemed fascinated by these stories and often asked thoughtful questions about my experiences and perspectives. But when Tyler started college at Vanderbilt, something changed dramatically in his worldview and his relationship with our family. He became involved with student activism groups and began adopting what seemed to me like increasingly extreme political positions. Every conversation we had seemed to turn into a lecture about social justice, systemic oppression, and the need for older generations to acknowledge their complicity in historical injustices. I tried to be understanding and supportive of Tyler's passion for social causes. I remembered being young and idealistic myself, and I thought this was probably just a phase he would grow out of as he gained more life experience. But his rhetoric became more aggressive and judgmental over time, and he seemed to view anyone who didn't share his exact political beliefs as enemies rather than people with different perspectives. During family gatherings, Tyler would dominate conversations with lectures about privilege, microaggressions, and systemic racism. He seemed to analyze every comment anyone made for hidden biases or problematic implications. Family dinners became tense affairs where everyone felt like they were walking on eggshells, afraid that any casual remark might trigger one of Tyler's political speeches. I began to feel uncomfortable around my own grandson, not because I disagreed with his desire for social justice, but because he seemed to have lost the ability to have normal, relaxed family conversations. Everything had to be viewed through the lens of political ideology, and anyone who didn't use the exact right language or express the approved opinions was immediately labeled as problematic. Dorothy was still alive during Tyler's sophomore year, and she tried to mediate between us when our conversations became heated. She would remind Tyler that his grandfather had fought for his country and worked hard to provide for his family, and she would encourage me to be patient with Tyler's passionate but sometimes misguided idealism. She believed that love and understanding could bridge any generational divide. But after Dorothy died, the dynamic between Tyler and me became even more strained. Without her calming influence and diplomatic skills, our interactions often devolved into arguments about politics and social issues. Tyler seemed to view my traditional values and perspectives as evidence that I was stuck in the past and unable to evolve with changing times. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner last year. Michael and Jennifer had invited the whole family to their house for the traditional meal, and I was looking forward to spending time with everyone and continuing our family traditions. Patricia had driven up from Memphis with her family, and we were all gathered around the dining room table, sharing stories and catching up on each other's lives. The conversation was pleasant and relaxed until someone mentioned the changes happening in our old neighborhood. Patricia commented that the area looked different than when she was growing up, and Michael mentioned that property values had increased significantly as more young professionals moved into the area. I added what I thought was an innocent observation about how the neighborhood had become more diverse and vibrant over the years. I mentioned that when Dorothy and I first moved to the house in 1975, our street was mostly older white families, but that over the decades, we had welcomed neighbors of many different backgrounds who had brought new energy and perspectives to the community. I talked about Mrs. Johnson, an elderly black woman who had moved in next door 10 years ago and had become one of my closest friends after Dorothy's death. I described how Mr. and Mrs. Patel, who had immigrated from India and bought the house across the street, had started the most beautiful garden in the neighborhood and often shared vegetables with everyone. I thought I was expressing appreciation for the diversity and positive changes in our community. I was trying to share how my perspectives had evolved over the years and how much I had learned from neighbors who came from different backgrounds than my own. I believed I was demonstrating the kind of openness and acceptance that Tyler claimed to value. But Tyler's reaction was immediate and explosive. He accused me of making racist microaggressions and perpetuating harmful stereotypes. He said that my comments about the neighborhood becoming more diverse revealed underlying biases, and that my references to specific neighbors showed that I viewed people of color as exotic novelties rather than normal community members. I was completely bewildered by his interpretation of my remarks. I tried to explain that I had been trying to express positive feelings about our community's diversity, but Tyler interrupted me and said that my defensive response proved his point. He claimed that I was exhibiting classic white fragility, and that my inability to accept criticism showed how deeply embedded my racist attitudes were. The entire family dinner dissolved into chaos. Tyler delivered a long lecture about systemic racism, white privilege, and generational trauma, while I sat there in shock, unable to understand how my attempt to praise our diverse neighborhood had been twisted into evidence of bigotry. Other family members tried to calm the situation, but Tyler was beyond reasoning with. Jennifer, who works in education and is generally progressive in her political views, tried to mediate by suggesting that this was just a misunderstanding that could be resolved through better communication. But Tyler rejected her efforts and accused the entire family of enabling racist behavior by not immediately condemning my comments. Michael, caught between his son and his father, attempted to defend both sides and find common ground. He acknowledged that language around race and diversity had evolved significantly and that older generations sometimes used terms or expressions that younger people found problematic, but he also argued that I had not intended any harm and that my heart was in the right place. But Tyler was having none of it. He announced that he was disgusted by the family's willingness to excuse racist language and that he needed to seriously reconsider his relationships with people who couldn't acknowledge their own biases and commit to doing better. He left the dinner early, and the rest of us spent the evening trying to process what had just happened. I drove home that night feeling confused, hurt, and deeply concerned about my relationship with my grandson. I couldn't understand how someone I loved so much could interpret my words so negatively, and I worried that our family bond might be permanently damaged by this misunderstanding. But the situation got much worse over the following days. Tyler took to social media to share his version of the Thanksgiving incident, describing me as a racist grandfather who had made harmful comments about neighborhood diversity and then became defensive when called out for his problematic language. He used terms like toxic boomer and racist microaggressions to characterize my behavior. Tyler's social media posts went viral among his college friends and activist community. Hundreds of people who had never met me were commenting on the posts, calling me names, and praising Tyler for having the courage to confront racism in his own family. I was horrified to discover that my private family conversation had been broadcast to the world, and that strangers were making judgments about my character based on Tyler's interpretation of my remarks. The social media campaign against me escalated quickly. Tyler's friends began looking up information about me online, finding my address and posting it along with encouraging people to let me know what they thought about racism and bigotry. I started receiving angry phone calls, hateful emails, and even letters delivered to my house from people who believed Tyler's version of events and wanted to express their outrage. Some of the messages were genuinely threatening. People told me that racists like me didn't deserve to live, that I should be ashamed of poisoning young minds with my hatred, and that they hoped I would die alone and unloved as punishment for my bigotry. I was terrified by the intensity of the hatred directed at me by complete strangers who knew nothing about my actual beliefs or character. The harassment extended beyond social media and into my real life. Someone spray-painted racist on my garage door. My mailbox was vandalized multiple times. Neighbors who had been friendly for years began avoiding me or looking at me with suspicion. Mrs. Johnson, who had been one of my closest friends since Dorothy's death, stopped talking to me altogether after hearing rumors about the Thanksgiving incident. I tried to reach out to Tyler directly to have a calm, private conversation about what had happened and to explain my actual beliefs and intentions. But he refused to speak with me, saying that he wouldn't engage with someone who couldn't acknowledge their own racism and commit to meaningful change. He blocked my phone number and social media accounts, cutting off all direct communication between us. Michael and Jennifer were caught in an impossible position. They tried to maintain relationships with both Tyler and me, but the pressure from their son and his online supporters made this increasingly difficult. Tyler demanded that his parents choose between supporting him or enabling their racist father, and he threatened to cut contact with them if they didn't publicly condemn my behavior. Patricia initially tried to defend me and explain the context of my comments to Tyler, but she eventually gave up when he accused her of being complicit in perpetuating racism by making excuses for my behavior. She began distancing herself from family gatherings and conversations about the situation, clearly uncomfortable with the conflict, but unwilling to risk her own relationship with Tyler. The situation became even more complicated when Tyler's activism caught the attention of local media outlets. A reporter from a Nashville newspaper contacted me for comment about allegations that I had made racist remarks at a family gathering. I was shocked that what I considered a private family misunderstanding had become a public news story. I declined to be interviewed, but the newspaper ran a story anyway, describing the incident based on information provided by Tyler and his supporters. The article presented a one-sided account that made me appear to be an elderly racist who had been rightfully called out by a socially conscious grandson. My name and neighborhood were mentioned in the article, leading to even more harassment and social isolation. Local civil rights organizations began using my case as an example of how racism persists across generations and how young people need to be willing to confront prejudice even within their own families. I found myself being discussed at community meetings and diversity workshops as a cautionary tale about the dangers of casual racism and white privilege. The most painful part of this entire experience has been the complete breakdown of my relationships with my children and grandchildren. Michael and Jennifer eventually decided that maintaining a relationship with me was too costly in terms of their relationship with Tyler and their standing in the community. They stopped inviting me to family gatherings and limited our contact to occasional phone calls that were strained and uncomfortable. Patricia made the same choice, prioritizing her relationship with Tyler and her concern about her own reputation over her relationship with her father. She explained that she couldn't risk being associated with someone who had been publicly labeled as racist, especially given her work in healthcare, where cultural sensitivity is highly valued. My other grandchildren, Tyler's sister Emma and Patricia's daughter Sarah, were also influenced by the family narrative about my supposed racism. They began treating me with suspicion and discomfort, clearly uncertain about whether the grandfather they had loved and trusted was actually the bigot that Tyler claimed me to be. The isolation and rejection by my own family has been devastating. For the past 6 months, I've been essentially cut off from the people I love most, branded as a racist based on a misunderstanding that spiraled completely out of control. I spend most of my time alone in a house that Dorothy and I shared, surrounded by photographs and memories of happier times when our family was united. I've tried to understand Tyler's perspective and to examine my own words and attitudes for any signs of the racism he claims to see. I've read books about unconscious bias, watched documentaries about systemic racism, and genuinely attempted to educate myself about issues that matter to young people today. But I remain convinced that my original comments were not motivated by prejudice or hatred. The irony of the situation is that Tyler's activism has accomplished the opposite of what he claims to want. Instead of promoting understanding and racial harmony, his campaign against me has created division, hatred, and pain within our family. Instead of educating me about racism, his approach has made me feel attacked and defensive. Instead of bringing our family closer together around shared values, his tactics have torn us apart. I've also been disturbed by the mob mentality and lack of due process that characterize the response to Tyler's accusations. Hundreds of people were willing to condemn me as a racist based on secondhand information and social media posts, without ever attempting to hear my side of the story or understand the context of my remarks. The rush to judgment and the intensity of the harassment I received seemed more like a witch hunt than a genuine effort to promote social justice. Living as a social pariah in my own community has been incredibly difficult. I've had to change my daily routines to avoid places where I might encounter people who recognize me from a newspaper article or social media posts. I shop at different stores, attend a different church, and generally try to keep a low profile to avoid confrontations or uncomfortable situations. The loneliness has been overwhelming. At 76 years old, after losing my wife and now my family, I spend most days alone with my thoughts and regrets. I've considered moving to a different city where no one knows my story, but at my age, starting over seems almost impossible. This house and this community have been my life for nearly 50 years, and the thought of abandoning everything because of a misunderstanding breaks my heart. But something unexpected happened 2 months ago that has given me hope for reconciliation and healing. I received a phone call from Dr. Sarah Williams, a professor of sociology at Vanderbilt University, who had heard about my case through her connections with student activist groups. Dr. Williams explained that she had been researching intergenerational conflict over racial issues and was interested in hearing my perspective on what had happened with Tyler. Dr. Williams was the first person in months who seemed genuinely interested in understanding the full context of the situation, rather than simply condemning me based on Tyler's version of events. She spent several hours interviewing me about my background, my experiences with diversity and race relations, and my recollection of the Thanksgiving conversation that started this whole nightmare. After reviewing my account along with Tyler's social media posts and the newspaper coverage, Dr. Williams concluded that I had been the victim of what she called cancel culture overreach and generational miscommunication. She believed that my original comments had been misinterpreted and that the response had been disproportionate and harmful to family relationships and community harmony. Dr. Williams offered to help mediate a conversation between Tyler and me, using her expertise in conflict resolution and her understanding of both generational perspectives and racial issues. She believed that with proper facilitation, we might be able to find common ground and begin repairing our relationship. Initially, Tyler refused to participate in any mediation, maintaining his position that I needed to acknowledge my racism and commit to change before any conversation could be productive. But Dr. Williams persisted, explaining to Tyler that his approach was unlikely to achieve his stated goals of promoting racial understanding and family harmony. Dr. Williams also reached out to other family members, helping them understand the psychological and social dynamics that had contributed to the escalation of this conflict. She explained how social media amplification, peer pressure, and generational differences in communication styles had turned a family misunderstanding into a public crisis. The breakthrough came when Dr. Williams organized a structured dialogue session with Tyler, me, Michael, and Jennifer. The session was held in her office at the university, with ground rules that emphasized respectful listening and the goal of understanding rather than winning arguments. For the first time in 6 months, Tyler and I were able to have a real conversation about what had happened at Thanksgiving dinner. With Dr. Williams facilitating, Tyler was able to explain why my comments had triggered such a strong reaction, and I was able to clarify my actual intentions and beliefs. Tyler acknowledged that he had been influenced by the intense political environment at his university, and that he might have overreacted to comments that were meant to be positive rather than negative. He admitted that his social media campaign had gotten out of hand, and that he regretted the harassment and threats I had received as a result. I was able to express my genuine commitment to racial equality and social justice, while also explaining how hurtful it had been to be labeled as a racist and cut off from my family. I acknowledged that my language might have been imperfect, and that I was willing to learn better ways to discuss issues of race and diversity. The mediation process took several sessions over the course of a month, but gradually, Tyler and I began to rebuild our relationship. He removed the social media post that had started the controversy and posted a clarification explaining that the situation had been based on a misunderstanding. While this didn't undo all the damage that had been done, it did help reduce some of the ongoing harassment and social pressure. Michael and Jennifer were relieved to be able to restore family relationships without feeling like they had to choose sides in an ideological battle. Patricia also began reaching out again, and slowly, our family has started the process of healing from this traumatic experience. The reconciliation with Tyler has been particularly meaningful because it has allowed us to have more productive conversations about race, social justice, and generational differences. We've been able to find common ground in our shared values of equality and fairness, even when we might disagree about tactics or approaches. Tyler has learned about the importance of assuming good intentions and giving family members the benefit of the doubt when communication problems arise. I've learned about the evolution of language around race and diversity and the importance of being more thoughtful about how my words might be interpreted by younger generations. Dr. Williams has documented our case as part of her research on family conflict resolution and has shared our story as an example of how mediation and structured dialogue can help heal relationships damaged by political and social misunderstandings. She believes that our experience offers hope for other families struggling with similar generational conflicts. Today, while our family relationships are still healing and may never be exactly the same as they were before, I'm grateful that Tyler and I have found a way back to each other. We have regular conversations now, and he even visits me occasionally to help with household projects and share updates about his life and career plans. The experience has taught me valuable lessons about the importance of precise communication, the power of social media to amplify conflicts, and the need for patience and understanding when dealing with generational differences. It has also reinforced my belief in the possibility of reconciliation and healing, even after the most painful misunderstandings. I've also become involved with organizations that work to promote intergenerational dialogue and understanding around social issues. I speak at workshops and community events about the importance of family communication and the dangers of allowing political differences to destroy personal relationships. That's my story. How my grandson accused me of racism over an innocent comment about neighborhood diversity, but how professional mediation and family commitment eventually brought us back together. Sometimes misunderstandings can spiral out of control and destroy relationships, but sometimes, with patience and the right help, families can find their way back to love and understanding.